The first time she said it, he almost laughed. It was a warm Saturday evening, and the whole neighborhood had gathered in the small park between the houses. Someone had set up folding tables. Someone else had brought a speaker playing old songs from years ago. Children were running around with paper plates full of chips, and the smell of grilled meat floated through the air. He stood by the grill, turning burgers carefully, making sure none of them burned. With one eye, he watched his daughter sitting on the grass a few feet away. She was drawing big, colorful shapes on the sidewalk with chalk, her tongue slightly out as she focused. Every few seconds, he checked on her, without making it obvious. That was how he lived his life now, always watching, always balancing. He had been a single father for 6 years, long enough to stop explaining the story, long enough to stop feeling sorry for himself. In the beginning, people asked questions. What happened? Was it hard? Did he plan to remarry? Over time, the questions faded, but the looks never really did. Some people admired him, some pitied him, some doubted him. He ignored all of it. Raising his daughter had become his world. He learned how to braid hair by watching videos late at night. The first few times were disasters. Crooked parts, loose ties. His daughter laughed and told him he needed more practice. He practiced. Now, he could do 2 neat braids in under 10 minutes. He learned which cartoon characters she liked, which socks felt too scratchy, and how to calm her down after a nightmare without turning on the lights. He knew her favorite cereal, her best friend's name, and the exact way she liked her sandwiches cut. He didn't do these things for praise. He did them because she was his responsibility, and because he loved her. At the barbecue, he wore a simple t-shirt and jeans. Nothing flashy. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He rarely tried to impress anyone anymore. A group of women stood near the drinks table, laughing loudly. They were talking about relationships, about dates gone wrong, about men who said big things but did little. One of them noticed him. She had seen him around before, always with his daughter. Quiet, polite, kept to himself. She was confident, the kind of person who spoke without filtering much. She enjoyed teasing people, especially when others were watching. It made her feel in control. She nudged her friend and tilted her head toward him. "Look at him," she said with a half smile. "Single dads are cute and all, but let's be honest." Her voice got slightly louder. "A man like that? Please. You can't really please a woman when your whole life is diapers and school runs." A few people chuckled. Not cruel laughter, but curious laughter. They were waiting to see how he would react. He heard it. Of course he did. For a brief second, something tightened in his chest. Not anger, more like a familiar feeling. He had heard comments before. Some direct, some whispered. He slowly turned his head and looked at her. She expected him to look embarrassed, maybe defensive, maybe annoyed. Instead, he smiled. Not a forced smile, not a sarcastic one, just calm. He flipped the burger once more, then said in a steady voice, "Want a bet?" The words were simple, but his tone carried something steady behind them. The group went quiet for a second. She blinked. "Oh, is that confidence I hear?" He shrugged lightly. "It's just experience." He didn't say anything else. He didn't step closer. He didn't try to charm her. He just turned back to the grill, like the conversation didn't need more. That bothered her more than if he had argued. Most men she teased would either try to flirt harder or try to prove themselves immediately. They would list qualities, jobs, gym routines, romantic ideas. They would perform. He didn't perform. He stayed exactly where he was, focused on cooking, occasionally glancing at his daughter. She crossed her arms and watched him for a few seconds longer than she planned to. Later that evening, his daughter ran up to him with chalk dust on her hands. "Look what I made," she said, pointing to a messy rainbow heart on the pavement. He bent down to her level. "That's beautiful," he said honestly. "You used all the colors." She grinned proudly. "It's for you." He wiped his hands on a napkin and gave her a gentle side hug. "I'm keeping it right there," he said, tapping his chest. The woman who had teased him saw that moment. Something about it didn't match the picture she had painted in her mind. She had assumed that being a single father meant being too busy, too tired, too distracted to give attention to anyone else. She imagined him overwhelmed and boring, predictable. But the way he looked at his daughter didn't look overwhelmed. It looked steady. A little later, when the food was served, he made a plate for his daughter first before making one for himself. He blew gently on the food to cool it down before handing it to her. Small actions, simple things. She walked over, holding her drink. "So," she said casually, "you always that confident?" He glanced at her, not surprised to see her there. "Not about everything," he replied. "Just about pleasing women?" she teased again. He leaned back slightly against the table. "No," he said, "about understanding people." She raised an eyebrow. "And you think you understand women?" He smiled again. "I think everyone wants the same basic things." "And what's that?" she challenged. "Respect, attention, consistency." The way he said it was not like a rehearsed line. It sounded like something he had learned the hard way. She tilted her head. "Consistency isn't exciting." "It depends what you're tired of," he answered quietly. That sentence stayed in her mind longer than she expected. Across the yard, his daughter started arguing with another child over a toy. The voices grew louder. Before anyone else could react, he walked over calmly. He didn't shout. He didn't grab her arm. He crouched down so he was at her eye level. He listened to both children. He asked questions. He guided them toward sharing. Within minutes, the tension melted, and the two kids ran off laughing again. The woman watched carefully. No drama, no raised voice, just patience. When he returned, she asked, "You're never tired?" He laughed softly. "All the time." "Then how do you stay so calm?" He looked toward his daughter, playing again. "Because she's watching." That answer hit differently. The sky slowly turned darker as the evening went on. People began packing up. Chairs folded. Music lowered. As he gathered his daughter's chalk and small jacket, the woman stepped closer one last time. "You really think you could win that bet?" she asked, but her tone was softer now. He slipped his daughter's tiny hand into his. "I'm not trying to win," he said. "Then what are you trying to do?" "Be solid," he replied. "For her, and for anyone else who comes into my life." There was no big speech. No attempt to impress her. He simply nodded politely and began walking home with his daughter beside him. She skipped a little as they walked, talking about the rainbow heart she drew and how tomorrow she wanted pancakes shaped like stars. He listened carefully to every word. The woman stayed behind for a moment, watching them disappear down the sidewalk. She had thrown that comment out casually, expecting it to bounce off him or spark a playful argument. Instead, he gave her something she didn't expect. Calm confidence. Not loud, not showy, just steady. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe she had misjudged him. Because the truth was, most men she had met tried to impress her with promises. He impressed her without trying at all. And that quiet smile when he said, "Want to bet?" kept replaying in her mind long after the music stopped and the park went silent. She didn't know it yet, but that simple moment had already started something neither of them saw coming. After that evening at the park, she told herself she wouldn't think about him again. It was just a joke, just a playful comment. She had teased many men before and forgotten about them the next day. But this time felt different. Not because of what he said. It was how he said it. Calm, steady, no need to prove anything. A few days later, early in the morning, she saw him again. She was getting into her car for work when she noticed him across the street. He was locking his front door while his daughter stood beside her with a backpack almost bigger than her shoulders. Her hair was tied into two neat braids, perfectly even. She paused for a second. He knelt down in front of his daughter and fixed the collar of her small jacket. Then he handed her a water bottle and said something that made her laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from feeling safe. He held her hand as they walked to his car. Before she got inside, he bent down again and listened as she talked quickly about something important in her little world. He didn't rush her. He didn't check his phone. That image stayed with her all day. At work, she found herself replaying his words. Consistency isn't exciting. It depends what you're tired of. She had always chased excitement. Big gestures. Intense beginnings. Strong chemistry. And most of those stories ended the same way. The excitement faded and so did the effort. She shook the thought away. She didn't want to admit that maybe what she really wanted was something calmer. A week later, she ran into him at the grocery store. He was in the cereal aisle, holding two different boxes while his daughter stood beside the cart with a serious expression. "This one has a cartoon tiger," the little girl argued. "Yes," he replied patiently. "But this one has less sugar." She folded her arms. "But the tiger one tastes better." He crouched down again, meeting her eyes. "How about this? We get the tiger one today. Next week, we try the other one." "Deal." She thought about it carefully, then nodded. "Deal." They shook hands like two adults closing an agreement. She couldn't help smiling as she watched from the end of the aisle. When he stood up, he noticed her. "Oh," she said lightly, pretending she hadn't been observing. "Negotiating breakfast again?" He chuckled. "It's serious business." She leaned against her cart. "You always as patient?" "No," he said honestly. "Sometimes I'm tired. Sometimes I want to just say no and move on. But I try to remember she's learning from me." "Learning what?" "How to handle disagreements. How to speak up. How to compromise." His daughter looked up proudly. "I'm very good at compromising." He smiled at her. "You're getting there." Something about the way he included his daughter in the conversation, instead of dismissing her, made her chest feel tight in a way she didn't expect. Most adults talked over children. He talked with her. As they walked toward the checkout, she found herself walking beside them, without planning to. "So," she said casually, "have you always been this balanced?" He gave a small laugh. "No, I had to learn." "From what?" "From messing up." She glanced at him. "You don't look like someone who messes up." He smiled slightly. "Everyone does." There was no self-pity in his voice, just truth. Outside the store, they stood near their cars for a moment longer than necessary. "You know," she said, crossing her arms playfully, "you still haven't explained your big confidence at the barbecue." He tilted his head. "About the bet?" "Yes." He leaned against his car door. "Most people think pleasing someone is about big moves, fancy dates, expensive gifts, saying the right words. And you disagree? I think it's about paying attention." "To what?" "To what makes them feel safe, heard, important." She looked at him carefully. "You talk like you studied this." He shook his head. "No, I just pay attention to what hurts when it's missing." That sentence lingered in the air between them. Before she could ask more, his daughter tugged on his hand. "Can we go home now? I'm hungry." He laughed softly. "Yes, boss." As he opened the car door for his daughter, she felt something unfamiliar. It wasn't attraction in the usual sense. It was curiosity, real curiosity. Over the next few weeks, she started noticing him more often, not in a forced way, just in everyday life. At the park, he didn't sit on his phone while his daughter played. He pushed her on the swings. He cheered when she climbed higher on the jungle gym. When she fell once and scraped her knee, he didn't panic. He calmly cleaned it with a tissue and whispered something that made her stop crying within seconds. She watched how he spoke to other parents. Polite, respectful, never trying to outshine anyone. One afternoon, it began to rain suddenly while several kids were still playing. Parents rushed to gather their children. In the middle of the light chaos, she saw him remove his jacket and place it over his daughter's head while guiding two other kids toward the shelter because their mother was struggling with a stroller. He didn't do it dramatically. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He just helped. Later that evening, she found herself sitting alone on her couch thinking about him again. Why did it bother her that he seemed so steady? She had built a habit of testing men, teasing them, pushing their buttons to see how they reacted. If they got angry, she walked away. If they tried too hard, she lost interest. But he didn't react in any extreme way. He stayed centered. The next time they spoke was at the park again. His daughter was drawing the dirt with a stick while he sat on a bench. She walked over and sat beside him without asking. "Are you always this calm?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "You've asked that before, and you didn't fully answer." He looked ahead at the playground. "I wasn't always calm. When I first became a single dad, I was scared all the time. I worried I wouldn't be enough. She was quiet. I tried to overcompensate at first, he continued, buying too many toys, saying yes to everything, trying to be perfect. What changed? I realized she doesn't need perfect. She needs stable. That word hit her deeply. Stable. She thought about her past relationships, the excitement, the drama, the highs and lows. None of them felt stable. And you think that's enough? She asked softly. For her? Yes. And for a woman? He turned slightly toward her. For anyone? There was no challenge in his tone this time, just sincerity. His daughter ran over suddenly. Can we get ice cream? He looked at the sky. It's almost dinner. She pouted dramatically. He laughed. How about we make ice cream at home after dinner? Her face lit up. With sprinkles? With sprinkles. She hugged him tightly before running off again. She watched that hug carefully. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't distracted. He hugged back fully. After a moment, she said quietly, You really believe in that bet, don't you? He gave her that same calm smile from a barbecue. I don't believe in proving people wrong, he said. I believe in showing them something different. She didn't respond right away. For the first time in a long time, she felt unsure of her usual confidence. Maybe she had been wrong about men like him. Maybe she had mistaken loudness for strength. And maybe the real surprise wasn't whether he could please a woman. Maybe the surprise was that he never needed to prove it loudly at all. As the sun began to set and the playground slowly emptied, she realized something simple but powerful. She was no longer watching him to judge. She was watching him to understand. And that shift scared her more than any argument ever could. The more time she spent around him, the more uncomfortable she became with her own thoughts. She had always believed she understood men. She believed they were predictable. They showed their best side in the beginning, then slowly stopped trying. They made promises they couldn't keep. They liked attention, but they didn't like responsibility. That belief had protected her. It kept her from expecting too much. But he didn't fit into that picture. One evening, she saw him sitting alone on a bench while his daughter was at a birthday party inside a small play center. The sun was going down and the sky was painted in soft orange light. He wasn't on his phone. He was just sitting quietly, watching through the glass doors to make sure she was okay. She walked over without thinking too much about it. You know you could go home and come back later, she said. He looked up and smiled. I could. So why don't you? He shrugged lightly. She feels better when she knows I'm nearby. You don't think she should learn independence? She is, he said gently. Independence doesn't mean feeling alone. That answer made her sit down next to him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The sounds of children laughing echoed from inside. She looked at him carefully. Can I ask you something? You usually do, he replied with a small grin. She ignored the tease. Why are you like this? Like what? Calm, patient, steady. Most people would be exhausted doing everything you do. He let out a quiet breath. I am exhausted. Then why don't you show it? He thought for a moment. Because she already lost one stable parent. I don't want her to feel like she's losing another. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. You're not angry? She asked softly. About what? About how things turned out. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed on the play center door. I was, he finally admitted. In the beginning, I was angry. I felt like I failed. I felt like I wasn't enough. Her chest tightened. She knew that feeling too well. But anger didn't help her, he continued. So I had to let it go. Just like that? She asked. He shook his head. No, not just like that. It took time. A lot of late nights. A lot of quiet thinking. She studied his face. There were faint lines near his eyes. Not from age, but from responsibility. You don't talk about this much, do you? She said. Not really. Why? He gave a simple answer. Not everything needs an audience. That line stayed with her. She realized something then. She talked a lot about her experiences. She joked about bad dates. She made dramatic stories sound funny. But she rarely sat quietly with her own feelings. He did. A few days later, she invited him for coffee while his daughter was at school. It wasn't a date. At least that's what she told herself. They sat outside a small cafe, sunlight falling across the table. "So," she said, stirring her drink, "do you ever think about dating seriously again?" He didn't seem uncomfortable with the question. "Sometimes. And I'm careful." "Careful how?" "I don't introduce anyone into her life unless I'm sure." "Sure about what?" "That they're stable, kind, patient." She gave a small laugh. "That sounds like a job interview." "In a way it is," he replied calmly. "Anyone close to me is close to her too." She looked down at her cup. "That's a lot of pressure." "It's responsibility," he corrected gently. She hesitated before asking her next question. "Do you think most women would want that?" He met her eyes. The right one would. She looked away quickly, pretending to check her phone. That simple sentence felt heavier than it should have. Over the next week, she found herself opening up more than she expected. One evening at the park, she finally admitted something. "I think I push people away," she said quietly. He didn't react with surprise. "Why do you think that?" "Because if I don't expect much, I can't get disappointed." He nodded slowly. "That makes sense. I tease. I test. I joke. It's easier than trusting." He didn't judge her. He didn't tell her she was wrong. Instead, he asked, "Has it worked?" She swallowed. "It's kept me from getting hurt too badly." "But has it made you happy?" That question landed softly but deeply. She didn't answer right away. Inside, she knew the truth. It had protected her. Yes, but it had also kept her alone. "You don't seem afraid," she said, turning the focus back to him. "I am," he replied honestly. "Every time I let someone close." "Then why do it?" "Because shutting down feels worse." The simplicity of his answer surprised her. He wasn't pretending to be fearless. He was choosing to try anyway. One afternoon, his daughter invited her to join him at the park for a picnic. It was spontaneous. Simple sandwiches, juice boxes, and a small blanket. She felt nervous sitting across from them. His daughter talked nonstop about school, about a drawing she made, about how she wanted to learn to ride a bike without training wheels. He listened with full attention, and he gently included her in the conversation. "What do you think?" he asked her when his daughter described her big bike plans. "I think you're brave," she told the little girl. The child smiled proudly. As they packed up the picnic, his daughter suddenly asked, "Are you my dad's friend?" She froze for a second. Before she could answer, he calmly said, "Yes, she's my friend." The way he said it felt safe. No pressure. No labels. Later, as they walked back, she said quietly, "You handled that smoothly." He smiled. "Honesty is easier. You're not worried she'll get attached?" "I don't let people get too close too fast," he said gently. "That protects everyone." That statement made her think deeply. He wasn't just protecting his daughter. He was protecting himself too. And maybe, in some quiet way, he was protecting her. That night, lying in bed, she replayed the first day she teased him. Like you can't please a woman. She had said it lightly, almost carelessly. Now it felt unfair. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't chasing validation. He wasn't performing for attention. He was simply living with intention. The next time they sat together on the park bench, she said something she never expected to say. "I think I misjudged you." He gave a small smile. "It happens. I thought being a single dad meant you'd be distracted. Too busy. Too tired." "I am busy," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean I can't make room." "Make room for what?" "For someone who understands." She looked at him carefully. "And if they don't, then I don't force it." His calmness was no longer intimidating. It was grounding. She realized something powerful in that moment. He wasn't trying to prove he could please a woman in the way she had meant that night. He was showing that real connection wasn't about excitement or ego. It was about showing up every day, without drama, without noise. And for the first time in years, she felt something new growing inside her. Not excitement, not fear, but trust. And that scared her more than anything else. Something shifted after that conversation on the park bench. It was not loud. There was no big confession, no dramatic moment, but something between them softened. She stopped teasing him as much. Not because she lost her sharp humor, but because she no longer felt the need to test him. Around him, she didn't feel like she had to win. One evening, he invited her over for dinner. It wasn't fancy. He warned her ahead of time. "I'm not a five-star chef," he said over the phone. "I'm not expecting candles and violin music," she replied lightly. When she arrived, the house was simple but warm. Toys were neatly placed in baskets. A small drawing was taped to the fridge. It was a picture of three stick figures holding hands. She didn't comment on it, but she noticed. He was in the kitchen stirring something on the stove while his daughter sat at the table coloring. "You're just in time," he said, smiling. "We're attempting homemade pasta." "Attempting?" she laughed. "Yes. If it fails, we have backup sandwiches." His daughter looked up. "It's going to be amazing. We practiced." She sat at the table and watched them move around the kitchen together. It wasn't perfect. At one point, flour spilled onto the floor. They laughed about it. At another point, the sauce tasted too salty and he calmly adjusted it. He didn't get frustrated. He didn't snap. After dinner, they all sat together in the living room. His daughter insisted on showing her a short dance routine she had learned. He clapped loudly at the end like it was a full stage performance. When bedtime came, he excused himself to tuck her in. She could hear faint whispers from the hallway, a short story being read, a soft goodnight, a gentle reminder to brush teeth in the morning. When he came back to the living room, his face looked softer. "She asleep?" she asked quietly. "Almost. She always asks for one extra story." "That's sweet." He sat down across from her. For the first time, they were alone in the house without distraction. There was a brief silence. "You're good at this," she said finally. "At what?" "This life." He shook his head slightly. "I'm learning as I go." She leaned back into the couch. "Most people would feel overwhelmed." "I do," he admitted. "But feeling overwhelmed doesn't mean I stop." She studied him carefully. "Do you ever wish it was easier?" He looked down at his hands for a second. "Of course. But easy doesn't always mean better." That answer felt like it carried years of quiet growth behind it. She took a breath. "I've been thinking about something." "Dangerous," he teased softly. She smiled faintly. "About what I said that day, at the barbecue." "About the bet?" "Yes." He didn't interrupt. "I said you couldn't please a woman. I meant it in a shallow way. I thought you'd be too busy, too focused on your daughter to really give attention to someone else." "And now," he asked gently, "now I see that the way you care for her, that's the same way you care for anyone." He didn't respond right away. She continued, "You pay attention. You listen. You don't rush. You don't try to impress with noise." He smiled slightly. "Noise fades." She laughed softly. "You and your simple wisdom." He leaned back in his chair. "It's not wisdom. It's just experience." She hesitated, then asked something that had been sitting in her heart. "Are you ever afraid that someone won't accept this life? That they'll think it's too much?" He answered honestly, "Yes." "And what would you do then?" "Let them go." The answer was immediate. Calm. She felt that answer deeply. "You wouldn't fight for them?" she asked. "I would," he said carefully, "if they were fighting for this life too. But I won't beg someone to accept my daughter." There was no anger in his voice, just clarity. That clarity made her realize something about herself. She had always tested men to see if they would chase her harder, to prove they wanted her, to fight for her attention. But he was not chasing. He was inviting. And the invitation came with honesty. A few days later, they took his daughter to the park together again. This time felt different. Not like she was observing from the outside. She felt included. His daughter ran ahead to the swings. "You're quiet today," he said as they walked. "I'm thinking. About whether I'm ready for something steady." He didn't rush to respond. "I've always been drawn to excitement," she continued. "Fast starts, big feelings." "And how did that turn out?" he asked gently. She smiled sadly. "You already know." He nodded. "I'm not asking you to change who you are," he said softly. "I just want you to be honest with yourself." She stopped walking and looked at him. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," he replied. "It's just not easy." That line stayed in her chest long after. Later that afternoon, while his daughter played on the slide, she asked him something she had never asked anyone directly. What does pleasing someone mean to you? He thought for a moment. It means making them feel value without them having to beg for it. She swallowed. And you think you can do that? He met her eyes with that same steady look. I already tried to. She felt something shift inside her again. Not butterflies, not drama, just warmth. As the sun began to set, his daughter ran over with scraped hands from climbing too fast. He immediately knelt down, checking gently. Does it hurt a lot? He asked softly. A little, she sniffed. He blew lightly on her hands and wiped them carefully with a tissue. You're brave, he said. But brave doesn't mean careless. His tone was firm, but kind. She watched that small moment closely. There was discipline, but also comfort, balance. On the walk home, she finally said what had been building inside her. I think I was wrong about you. He smiled slightly. You've said that before. No, she said more seriously. I was wrong about what strength looks like. He looked at her, curious. I thought strength was loud, confident, bold, always proving itself. But with you, it's quiet. It's patient. He didn't respond with pride. He just listened. And maybe, she added, that's what I've been missing. They reached his front door. Before going inside, he turned to her gently. I'm not perfect, he said. I'll mess up. I'll get tired. I'll make mistakes. I know, she replied softly. But I won't disappear, he added. That sentence felt heavier than any romantic speech. She realized something important in that moment. The bed he made that night at the barbecue wasn't about proving he could charm her. It was about proving he could stay. And staying, she now understood, was far more powerful than impressing. As he opened the door and his daughter ran inside, laughing about something silly, she stood there for a second longer. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't wondering if he could please a woman. She was wondering if she was ready to be pleased in a way that required trust. And that question felt bigger than any tease she had ever thrown at him. Weeks turned into months, and their connection grew quietly. There was no rush, no pressure, no dramatic gestures. Just small, steady moments that built trust and understanding between them. She had stopped teasing him about the bet at the barbecue. That playful challenge had faded into something far deeper, something neither of them could name yet, but both felt. It started with mornings at the park, waiting for his daughter to finish her small art class. He would arrive first, carrying her backpack, and she would arrive a few minutes later, coffee in hand. They would walk together slowly, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes the conversation was light. Sometimes it wandered into memories or fears. She began to notice how he handled the ordinary moments of life, the moments most people overlooked. He never rushed. He never complained. He simply showed up, fully present. One afternoon, they sat on a bench under the shade of a tree. His daughter was off playing with a friend, and the park was quieter than usual. She glanced at him, unsure why her heart beat a little faster at the sight of his calm demeanor. Do you ever feel like life is unfair? She asked suddenly. He looked at her, eyes thoughtful. All the time. Really? She said, surprised. You never seem like someone who complains. I don't need to complain, he said. Life isn't about fairness. It's about how you handle what comes. She stared at him, fascinated. There was no arrogance in his words, no preaching. Just honesty. And you handle it well? She asked softly. I try, he said with a faint smile. I fail sometimes, but I always try again. There was something in that simplicity, in that quiet determination, that made her chest tighten. Most people talk about their struggles endlessly, turning them into drama or excuses. He didn't. He acted. He stayed consistent. Even when no one was watching. Over the next few weeks, she noticed small things she had never paid attention to before. He noticed when she seemed tired and asked if she wanted to sit quietly. He remembered small details about conversations they had weeks ago. He checked on his daughter's homework without making it a lecture. He cooked meals thoughtfully, even when it meant staying up late. Each small act built a quiet reassurance she hadn't realized she needed. One evening, they found themselves walking down a quiet street after dropping his daughter at a friend's house. The sky was dark, but the streetlights glowed warmly. She walked beside him, thinking about the first time she had teased him at the barbecue. How wrong she had been. He had proven something far more important than she had imagined. He had shown her what consistency looked like, what true care looked like, and what quiet strength really meant. You know, she said slowly, I've been thinking about that night, the barbecue. He raised an eyebrow, amused. The bet? Yes, she said, smiling faintly. I didn't realize it then, but you were right. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about showing who you are. He nodded. Sometimes showing is better than telling. And you've shown me a lot, she admitted. Not just about you, but about what I want and what I've been missing. He glanced at her, quiet and steady. And what have you been missing? Someone who doesn't need to prove themselves every second, she said softly. Someone who just shows up. He didn't speak immediately. He let her words hang in the air, letting her feel the weight of them. Then he reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. That someone shows up every day, even when it's hard, he said quietly. The simplicity of his words struck her. No dramatics, no decorations, just truth. Later that week, they spent a Saturday at home with his daughter. They baked cookies together, making a mess in the kitchen but laughing all the way through. His daughter insisted on adding extra chocolate chips, and he let her, laughing at the chaos. She watched them, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't expected. After the cookies were in the oven, his daughter ran off to play, and they sat at the small kitchen table together. She leaned back in her chair, watching him quietly. You know, she said, I've been wrong about a lot of things. He looked at her curiously. About me? About life, she said. About what strength is. About what patience is. About how love can look quiet instead of loud. He smiled softly. It's easy to mistake loud for strength, he said. Most people do. And you've taught me otherwise, she said quietly. There was a pause. Neither spoke for a moment. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting warm light across the kitchen. His daughter ran back in, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from the yard. These are for you, she exclaimed, handing them to her. She smiled at the little girl and took the flowers, feeling a tenderness she couldn't explain. Thank you, she said. They're beautiful. His daughter beamed. You're welcome. As they cleaned up the kitchen, she noticed how naturally he included her in the family's rhythm without making her feel like an outsider. He listened to her opinions, even when his daughter's ideas sometimes took precedence. He didn't try to control the moment. He just guided it gently. That evening, as they walked home from the park, she stopped to look at him. Do you know why I've been thinking about that bet so much? She asked. He shook his head. Tell me. Because it wasn't about winning, she said softly. It was about showing. About proving that consistency matters more than flash. That being present matters more than excitement. That caring quietly matters more than saying the right words. He smiled faintly, looking ahead. Exactly. And you've done that every day, she continued. Not just for your daughter, but for me too, without even trying. He didn't boast. He didn't make a big speech. He just reached out and lightly squeezed her hand. It's simple, he said. Showing up, listening, caring. That's what matters. Over the next few months, their relationship settled into a comfortable rhythm. They spent weekends together, not rushing, not forcing moments. They shared meals, walks, laughter, and quiet conversations. She learned to let go of the need to test him. He learned to let her see the small vulnerabilities he usually kept to himself. One afternoon, during a neighborhood barbecue similar to the one where it all began, someone jokingly reminded her of her comment from months ago. Hey, remember when you said he couldn't please a woman? A neighbor laughed. She looked at him and then at the group, smiling softly. I was wrong, she said calmly. The laughter around her faded. It wasn't meant to be mean-spirited, but it carried a little surprise. She walked over to him and added quietly, Turns out consistency wins. He gave her the same calm smile he had given months ago at the barbecue. But this time, it wasn't challenge. It was reassurance, a quiet confidence that needed no words. His daughter ran up with a small ball, asking him to play. He bent down and tossed it gently back to her. She watched him, feeling the same warmth she had felt months ago. But deeper now, she realized that the bet, the teasing, the quiet tension, they had all been part of something bigger. It wasn't about proving he could please a woman. It was about proving that showing up every day mattered more than any grand gesture. That love could be patient, steady, and gentle without being loud. That real strength was quiet, dependable, and unwavering. She realized then that she didn't need drama. She didn't need someone to impress her with words or charm. She needed someone who would stay, who would care, and who would be consistent. And he had done exactly that. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she looked at him and saw not just a man, not just a father, but someone who had quietly transformed her understanding of love. And in that moment, she knew that the smile he gave her, the calm, steady smile he had given her months ago when she first teased him, was more than a challenge. It was a promise that he would continue to show up, continue to care, and continue to be present no matter what. And sometimes she realized the strongest answer to doubt isn't words. It isn't gestures or speeches. Sometimes the strongest answer is simply showing up day after day with patience, love, and quiet consistency. She smiled back at him, finally understanding everything the bet had always meant. And in that quiet, unspoken understanding, something shifted between them. Something steady, something real, and something lasting. Because in the end, he had never needed to prove anything loudly. He had proven it all quietly every single day. And now she knew that was enough.